Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. I have a lot of people to thank, in particular Wali Zahid for managing to schedule himself to be in two cities at the same time, which meant that I could step in his place and talk to you today. I'm going to try and keep my conversation a bit at a surface level so that maybe there's some questions and we can get into depth later on. I want to start with two stories. This is 2004. I was here doing some work with Marhum Mia Ghani Sahab, and in the conversation things came up about the way the world was changing, the international environment was changing, regulatory environment was changing, and so on. And I was talking about how the barriers to entry into various markets had now shifted. And this was in particular a relationship to Pakistani manufacturing and exporting, because we had, frankly, coasted along for about 20 years on government quotas and European Union quotas and subsidies for this and various other regulatory interventions. And what happened essentially was that in 2001, China signed the WTO, and therefore it came within the ambit of international trade. You didn't have to have bilateral relationships anymore to facilitate trade. Now there was a supranational national organization doing it. And sort of follow-on consequences of that was that around 2003, the European Union announced that it was going to stop all quotas for imported textiles of all kinds, finished garments, yarn, cloth, the whole thing. And this is what I was talking about. And Mia Sahab sort of said, yeah, I know somebody who needs to hear this thing. So he arranged this meeting in this really fancy house in Defense, this palatial place. We were met very graciously, served a sumptuous tea. And he's, Mia Sahab said, can you please tell him what you were telling me? So I did that. And about 3 or 4 minutes into the conversation, I could see that I'd lost my audience. I was using words that just did not resonate with this man. But he was patient. He was a very gracious man. He heard me through for about 10 minutes, and then he stopped me. He said, "Aapke kitne units hain?" I said, "Mere koi units nahi hai. I'm an academic, I'm a consultant, I'm an advisor. When I worked for other people, I was an executive." And so he sort of, that sort of made the final decision in his mind. I was not someone to be listened to. What I was telling him essentially was that with the entry of China into the international markets and with the falling apart of quotas in the European Union, Pakistan textile was in a very, very tight squeeze, and I could not see a future for it if it continued the way it was. And here's why. Can't compete on cost with China. Their volumes are simply too big. Their unit costs are simply much, much lower than you will do. You also had new entrants into the market where Pakistan had some protection before. You had Bangladesh as a manufacturer, you had Cambodia, you had Honduras as a manufacturer, and then there were these emerging people who were targeting the mid to high level market in finished garments. Turkey, for instance. It was nascent at that time, their industry was just beginning, but it was happening. And what I could see was that Pakistan would get squeezed between this classic thing about competing on cost, in other words, low price products, or competing on quality. Couldn't compete with the specialized European manufacturers who were making very small but very pricey textiles or garments and things like that. He had no time for that. So what he told me was, humne Germany se machines mangwayi hai, we'll be all right. I wasn't talking about machinery. This wasn't about internal competence. This was something else. So let's leave that there. A few years later, I was trying to do some research in Pakistan. I was trying to find out what motivates corporate social responsibility in the country, whether it was motivated by some personal, social, religious values, or whether there was a corporate strategy behind it, whether there was something more formal that was informing. Pakistan is a hugely philanthropic country. It is probably per capita based on, if you sort of neutralize the value of the dollar and so on, it's probably one of the top 2 or 3 philanthropic countries in the world. I know it's a very tortuous argument, but let's just say that we are. But I wanted to know if there was a system behind it. And I was interviewing this chief executive of a pharmaceutical company who, in raising voice, sort of told me all sorts of wonderful things that they were doing. And he was quoting the Quran and, all of everything that went into him. Hugely emotional presentation. And what ended up was that he had invested something like $17, $18 million into creating a burns specialist unit in one of the major hospitals in Karachi, which sounds fantastic, and it was. It's just, very good equipment. He was paying for specialist nurses to be trained. He was paying for doctors to be trained. This is really genuinely good work. The question that was in my mind throughout was, is that the most pressing need for the citizens of Pakistan, Karachi in particular? Do we really have that many burns victims? Is that money, $17 million, buys a lot in Pakistan, even today? In 2006, even more. And I didn't have sort of the courage to confront him because he was in a big emotional thing. So finally, I did ask him about what motivated these decisions, what kind of thinking went behind it. And it turns out that it was very honorable reasons, but just not very well thought out. His mother had just passed away a couple of years earlier, and she had an interest because somebody in her employment had burned to death. So he had invested all of this money in creating this burns unit. And I was thinking how many lives he could save with $17 million if he just had vaccinations, that classic 5 vaccinations for childhood, or prenatal care, which would save God knows how many thousands of women in Pakistan in childbirth. But of course, that was a different kind of decision. This was a decision made out of emotion. So that got me thinking, and for the last 11 years, I've been thinking about how we make, not just in Pakistan, all over the world, how we make decisions. There's a lot of science involved in it, and we know a lot of that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to do is sort of give you this thing called the decision bow tie. And this black box, this decision box, a lot of management psychologists have done work on it. We know quite a lot about it. We also know quite a lot about the inputs that go into it, and some of you have already heard about it. I was fortunate enough to listen to the last maybe half of the presentation from Mr. Dada, and he's talking about a lot of these things when he's saying that, do the analysis, learn your customer, what are your values? Ideologically, the decisions are colored by ideology. You must have heard about the building burning down in London with the loss of at least 81 lives so far. Purely ideological decisions. The idea that there should be small government, taxpayers' money should be saved, and therefore we don't invest it in the safety of buildings. They saved how much money they saved in Grenfell Tower? £5,000. £5,000 for the life of 80 people. But that was an ideologically driven decision. So, and this is the stuff that we teach in business schools. We're very good at it in business schools, whether it's a course in ethics or it's a course in analysis, strategy, operations, whatever. What we're not very good at, either in the workplace or in business schools, and generally maybe in life also, is what happens afterwards. So we have a desired effect, what we want the outcome to be, and we calculate that to the second decimal point, usually. And we usually have some kind of scenario planning, so we know what other anticipated outcomes might be. What we don't pay so much attention to is the unanticipated outcomes. Just because they are slightly on the peripheral side of our decision-making. This is not what the analysis was. We didn't focus on that, and we don't think about that. That's bad enough. But worse is the fact that we don't quite understand the ramifications. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. The ramifications of what we're doing. Ramifications are the outcomes of outcomes. They're the second-tier outcomes. So the fact that the council decides, the council in Kensington and Chelsea decides not to invest in 5,000 extra pounds to get a higher class of cladding outside insulation. The outcome of that is that now you have a fire trap of a building. Not a problem if your building is designed for safety. There are 2 ways you design buildings for fire safety. One for quick evacuation, and the other for containment. If you design a building for containment, you need to have fire doors. You need to have thick walls in certain cases so the fire can be contained in one cell. And then what you tell your citizens or your residents is that if there's a fire alarm, stay in your homes because that's safer and the fire brigade will go and deal with it in whichever apartment or block the fire is in. This building was designed for containment. But because the council was saving money, there were no fire inspections. The fire doors were left open. There was no sprinkler system. There was no public address system to tell the people when to leave or what to do. 81 people died. 81 people burned to death. And you would say this happens all the time around the world. Accidents happen. Allah ki marzi. This is not Allah ki marzi. This is human incompetence at work. Okay. So let me sort of park this idea that we're not very good at the output side of decision making. And let me go to this man called Clayton Christensen. You might know about him as the disruption guy, or the chap who talks about radical innovation and so on. This is a quote from this book of his, which was written in 1997. And he says something about the way decisions are made in organizations, successful organizations, that sows the seed for eventual failure. And what he's talking about here is the outcomes of outcomes, the ramifications of what happens. If you're good at doing something, you continue doing it. It makes just sense to it, right? If you're Kodak, you keep making film. That's where your money comes from. Right? Why, you invent the digital camera, but why would you popularize it? Because only 20% of your money comes from hardware. 80% of your income comes from consumables. You can think about it in any sense. If you're an airline, why would you go point to point? Why would you compete on price? Why would you discount? Because your money comes from gathering people in one place, short flights, and then flying them out on a big plane far away. Except that when Southwest Airline came along, it changes the entire aviation industry model. And since that time, most airlines have lost money. You can, don't think of it as 1 or 2 years, but look at it over a decade, returns on investment and so on. So there's something about the way we make decisions that causes us problems. And that takes me to this sort of thing about how do we counteract these things? And this is a little bit of advice from research, and quite a lot of it from my practical experience working with organizations over 3 continents. We need to be thinking about how we create new value. That's exactly what Mr. Dada was talking about. The old systems, the old ways of doing things. Yes, they will work for a while. If you're very, very lucky, they might work for 5 or 6 years until somebody comes around and finds a better way of creating value for the customer. Value, we measure it in money because that's one of the easiest ways for us to measure things. But value is not about profit or revenue. Or if it is over a long period of time. You're giving someone something that helps them solve a problem in their life. People hire products to do a job for them. When you buy a plate or a knife or a fork, you're buying it so that you can put your food. The job is, how do I get my food from my pot into my stomach via sitting on a table? You can put it on a paper plate. That's not quite good enough. And so you buy cutlery and crockery and things like that. Everything you do is a job. So here are some things that we need to think about in some more detail. If you take nothing away from what I have said today, this is the point I want to make. What causes people to buy your product? No market segmentation is going to tell you that. I'm 57 years old, I'm 1 meter 78 centimeters tall, I'm 88 kilograms, 18 of which is chocolate cake and ice cream and suji ka halwa. That doesn't tell you why I buy this clicker, why I buy these glasses. Segmentation doesn't tell you that. You can find out everything you know about me, but if you do not understand what job I'm trying to do, you won't understand that. So it's what causes people to buy things that you need to know about. And that's something that, marketing has all kinds of wonderful things to teach about. Marketing research is very useful, but it won't tell you what the customer himself or herself does not know. This is Morita's quote. Morita, the legendary chairman of Sony, he said, the customer does not know what is possible. We do. And that's when Sony was the leading technology corporation in the world. So that's one thing. Along with it, what is your business model? How do you serve that customer? What alliances do you need? What resources do you need? What pain are you relieving for your customer? And so on and so forth. Right? The third thing I would suggest is that you need to engage. And engage, I don't mean you have a nice little, motivation package for your employees, or you do in customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction surveys are the most annoying things ever invented, because they don't ask you the question that you really want to answer. I'm sort of running out of time, but I'll tell you this quick story. So a few years ago in London, in March, it was cold. I was leaving the office. I was the last one to leave. In fact, the security guard was saying, please, sir, ghar chale jaye aap. So I walked out. I'm the only one in the car park. go into my car, and my battery's dead. No problem. I'm a member of the AA, the Automobile Association. I called them up, and I said, this is the problem. He says, I'm sorry, sir, but this membership number has expired. Not possible. I have an automatic renewal. And nobody told me that my credit card had expired or something was wrong with my transaction. It should have been renewed in January. He says, yeah, I can see that, sir. You do have an automatic renewal, but your membership is expired. I said, I'm sorry, that's not my problem. Well, okay, so let me talk to my supervisor. He talks to his supervisor, comes back and says, well, because of this thing, special consideration, we will renew your membership right now for £49. £49? I've already paid you £200. Anyway, I'm stuck. So I said, all right, let's do that. I give him my debit card number. He transacts it, sends the card. And at the end of the conversation, I said, I know it's not your job. I want somebody to call me tomorrow because I'm deeply unhappy about this. Nothing happens the next year, not the next day. Nothing happens the next week, the next month. 2 or 3 months later, I'm walking out of the supermarket. Their competitor, the Royal Automobile Club, RAC, I have a stand there saying membership. I walk up to him and I say, look, I'm looking for somebody because I'm fed up with your competitor. Are you going to treat me properly and all of that? Here's my card, sir. Please go ahead. So I sign up. I said, can you cancel my membership with the other people? He says, yes, we can do that, sir. Right, so I switch. Still nothing from the AA. A couple of months later, somebody calls me. He says, we've just noticed that you've canceled your membership. I said, aha, finally somebody's paying attention. He says, I said, yes, I did cancel my membership. Was the reason price? I said, no, it wasn't price. It was that I was deeply unhappy with your service. Are you sure it wasn't price? Yes, I was deeply unhappy with your service. Thank you very much. Click. I'm seeding you. I'm leading you on. I'm saying, no, it's because I'm unhappy. Please ask me the follow-up question. Why? But you don't. And that's what I mean by engagement. This wasn't this poor boy's fault. He was given a script to read, and he read it. And somebody must have decided we are losing members, and maybe because it's price-based competition. I was the perfect customer. Automatic renewal. They kept jacking up my price. I never questioned it because I'm too lazy. And they lost me. And since that day, every year, because I have tons of undergraduate students, I do a lot of consulting work, I talk to people like you, I've been telling this story. And the AA is getting free negative publicity. Okay? So the fourth thing I'll tell you about is measure. And measure not what is easy, but what is important. We tend to use financial metrics because they're easy, and financial metrics are very important if you're deciding which investment to take, what the IRR is, and those of you who are finance people understand what I'm talking about. But that doesn't tell you anything about your customer and your relationship with your customer. It doesn't tell you anything about your new product development pipeline. It doesn't tell you anything about how you fit in the changing paradigms that Shahzad Dada was talking about in the industry in which you think you operate. By the way, what does McDonald's do? It's not a trick question. Well, it is a trick question. You think of them as a fast food restaurant. They're in the land leasing business. That's where the money is. That's why McDonald's has the best locations. Okay? And finally, research. And research, Pakistani organizations, like many organizations in the developing world, have this allergy to research. I've dealt with a number of people here, and they like to think that they have some kind of information that nobody else in the world has. And I try and tell them there is nothing that you have that I don't already know. Not because I'm some kind of genius or I have some secret knowledge, but because industries tend to work the same way. I don't know exactly what your profit margin is, but I can guess within a percentage or so of that because I know the size of the Pakistani market. I know the type of competition, whether it's fragmented or concentrated, and I can compare it to comparable economies. This is all public data. What are you hiding? But in that reluctance to engage with research, what you're doing is not gaining new knowledge, not getting the kind of information that gets you insights. your competitors might be competing in a completely different environment. They might be mistaken, and because you're following them, because you haven't done the research, you don't know. And you all fall off the cliff together. That's great. Except that, your business is now completely wiped out. So think about these things, and I just surface level, and I suppose you can all question me, and I will be wrong in some cases. I like being wrong. It means I learn something. But just sort of have a think about these things, and that's where I want to leave you. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Okay? So may I just thank the organizers here for allowing me to come in and to badger you with this thing, and thank you to CVM also for the invitation, and inshallah we'll see you sometime again. Thank you very much.